Thanks everybody. I'll sit down, otherwise I should feel like a school teacher. And I haven't got that voice. I'm a member of Unite Against Fascism, one of the organisations involved in setting up Holocaust Memorial Day here in Oxford, and it's a really fantastic exhibition that I've just been torn away from. It's so interesting. And just before Christmas we went on an organised educational visit to Auschwitz, and some other bits that were involved in that around Krakow. And it seems inappropriate to describe it as a wonderful experience, to describe it as a great experience, to try and find anything positive. But it was a life-changing experience. Auschwitz takes people in different ways. We had quite a large group of people with different experiences and from different backgrounds. We had quite a large group of Jewish socialists for whom there was a particular resonance to go to a death camp. There was one woman there whose mother had been in Auschwitz. She'd survived, and she'd been on the death march, and the woman in question was making a piece of art to commemorate her mother's life, and she'd gone around the death march at various sites and picked up soil and was going to use this to grow something from as a work of art. There is a massive taboo on taking soil from Auschwitz. You do not do that. So what she did was, when we got back on the coach at the end, she brushed the soles of our shoes into a container. That's going to be part of her art installation. But nothing can really prepare you for the sheer scale of the place. We know what happened there. Everybody's familiar with the awful photographs, so it's not the shock it may have been perhaps in the 1950s when people first started to visit, but the sheer scale of the place is completely overwhelming. And it takes everybody in a different way. For many people, the thing which they find the hardest is the exhibition of shoes. Everybody knows there's a pile of shoes. And in fact, what you don't realise is the room is as long as this one, and there is a set-back glass case, and it's the entire length of this room, piled 7 or 8 feet high with shoes. And most of them are working shoes, but every now and again there's a dress shoe, a court shoe, a shoe that somebody had clearly taken time to pick out and loved. And that connection is extremely moving. For other people, it was things like shaving brushes. For me, actually it was the tins of Cyclone B that had been tipped into the chimneys. It's the realisation that these aren't similar to the tins of Cyclone B that were tipped into the chimneys. These are the actual tins. They were tipped in, discarded, picked up, and now you're looking at them. At one point, I just kind of got atrocitied out, and I wanted to just take a little breather. All I wanted to do was step outside, just compose myself for a minute. And there was the realisation that there's no stepping outside. For mile after mile from wherever you go, it's Auschwitz, every foot of the way. And it's impossible to imagine what it must have felt like for the prisoners who were kept in Auschwitz. What was really important about the visit was that it was an educational trip, and we did other things. We had a tour of Krakow, including trips to the Jewish Quarter and what was the Jewish Ghetto, and to Schindler's Museum and other places. And in the evenings we had meetings looking at the background and politics of what happened. Confronted with the reality of the sheer scale of the organised mass slaughter of human beings, and to see it laid out in front of you, not in your imagination or depicted on screen, poses the question quite urgently: how on earth did that happen? How can we make sure that doesn't happen again? There was resistance even during the war. There was resistance to this actually coming from within camps. If you look around later in the exhibition here, it's really described very nicely. There was an uprising at one crematorium, Crematorium 4, in 1944, where a group of Sondo commanders who are prisoners with special privileges had an uprising. They managed to blow up one of the crematorium. Some of the other Sondo commanders took photographs. They found a camera when they were stripping down the bodies. They took photographs with it and you can see these are easily, but I don't know if they're here, of women being driven towards the gas chamber and of bodies being burnt. And they smuggled these out as a way of trying to alert the Allied forces to what was happening. The problem was the Allied forces were perfectly aware of what was happening, and weren't really very interested. The Allies did not bomb Auschwitz. They did not even bomb the railway lines going up to Auschwitz, despite the fact it was very close to a number of bombing targets. Treblinka. I was lucky enough to go visit Treblinka a couple of years ago. Treblinka is just a field now with an exhibition. It was absolutely levelled by the Nazis before they left it. And there was an uprising there of more than 200 of the inmates, and they managed to get to the armoury and have quite an organised uprising. 200 of them escaped. 100 of those were subsequently recaptured, but more than 100 actually managed to get away. It's very isolated out there in Treblinka. Doesn't really bear thinking about the Polish winter in a concentration camp uniform, but the guys managed to do it. But the point is, fact is, that by the time fascism is taking control of society, it's too late for that kind of resistance. Really, the time to have stopped it was in the 1930s, as Hitler was coming to power. And it's one of the great tragedies of history that there were plenty of opportunities to stop Hitler in his journey up in the late 1920s and the late 1930s. It's often said in the media, and it does my head in, that Hitler was elected, that he won elections. No, he didn't. Hitler never won the election. Hitler was brought into government by Hindenburg at a point when the economy was collapsing and the powers that be were afraid of the resurgent workers' movement. So they shored together a right-wing collective of business-friendly parties and brought the Nazi Party, who had some authority, some power, and also had a street militia who were very good at thumping people they disagreed with. They brought them into power. The moment Third Reich, Hitler, the Nazis had a sniff of real power, they dismantled the democratic systems that had brought them there in the first place. The tragedy about this was that there were two very powerful workers' organisations active in Germany at that point. The SPD, the Reformist Party, a bit like our Labour Party, and the KDP, which is the Communist Party. Between them, they had far more influence in the working class, and they had the numbers to far outweigh anything that the Nazis could bring. But rather than uniting together, they adopted some quite deranged policies where they saw each other as the main enemy and discounted Hitler as just a transitory phenomenon. In fact, the KPD under the influence of Stalin, adopted the policy of social fascists and argued that basically the Labour Party supporters, the equivalent of those, were no better than the Nazis, and they were just waiting for an opportunity to knife the workers just the way that the fascists did. And they argued that once this had blown over, it would be the turn of the communists to be able to take power. They'd say, after Hitler, our turn. The frustration of this was that if they had come together simply on the basis of opposing Hitler, if they could have ignored all their other differences, which were very real, and in fact it's worth remembering that these guys in the SPD had murdered the leaders of the KPD in 1918, so this wasn't an abstract political disagreement. These people had good reason not to get on, but the fact of the matter was that the threat of Nazism, the threat of what Hitler could do to the combined workers' movement, if he got power, meant that they should have dropped all those differences, and in unity they should have stood against Hitler. In fact, by the time they did, it was far too late. Hitler came to power and actually annihilated both those parties and the entire workers' movement in Germany. Why does this matter? Fascism occurs when the economy is struggling, when the economy is in decline over a long period, and the owners of the businesses, the business classes, can't get out of it. People become desperate, disorientated, and a section of people will become susceptible to ideas about clamping down on scapegoats and removing workers' rights in order to kickstart the economy. The use of scapegoats, the use of dividing people against each other, in the case of the Third Reich, it was Jews, is a really common trope on this, a really common tactic. If we look at the situation we're in now, the global economy has been failing in its own terms since 2007. In fact, it's not really showing any signs of getting out of that. More than that, the living standards of ordinary working people have been stagnant and declining throughout Europe and the Western world for decades. So the use of these scapegoats, rather than pointing out that the problem is with the system that we have, with the economy that we have, pointing out that the problem is it's only people against each other using racism, they did it using anti-Semitism in the period of the Nazis. These days, there's still a lot of anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism is on the rise across Europe. But the other great scapegoat we have now is Islamophobia and the scapegoating of Muslims, which is really quite eye-watering. And if you read a lot of the mainstream press, which I wouldn't refer to as Nazi, but you'll read Islamophobic articles, and if you simply change the word Muslim for Jew, it reads like something that you'll see on these exhibition boards here from the 1930s. Over in Europe, we're seeing the emergence of a Nazi current which is responding to this global austerity, ongoing global austerity, with some really frightening echoes of what we saw in the 1930s. The AfD, there's some great boards about this, in Germany have more than 40 outright Nazi MPs. These aren't UKIP-y sort of Tories or right-wing popularists. These are out-and-out Nazis, the Holocaust deniers, Islamophobes. The Australian Freedom Party is part of the government coalition in Austria. Their leader has said quite clearly that, quite openly, Islam is not a part of Austria. Jobbik in Hungary, a particularly frightening example of this. They have a very organised militia that's carried out brutal attacks on the Roma, Jews and other minorities, and have said as they're part of their policy that Roma will be encouraged to emigrate. We have the Golden Dawn in Greece, who smashed up Holocaust Memorial. National Front National in France, who are Holocaust deniers, support banning of the hijab. They come from a long line of Nazis, plenty of others. And the Front National made some fantastic, frightening advances in the French presidential elections. They didn't get anywhere, but that's just one. They can have a long game. So we need to be very aware of that. And of course, although it's not a Nazi, and it's important to emphasise that Donald Trump is not a Nazi, Donald Trump is an extremely unpleasant character who has friends on the outright, what's called the alt-right, which is just the modern fashionable way of referring to Nazis, has rather unhelpfully retweeted a British Nazi far-right group called Britain's First, retweeted sympathetically some of their posts. And in a piece of civil disobedience in Charlottesville, where there was a riot with some neo-Nazi organisations against some anti-fascists, he very much come out and said that he thinks that there were bad guys on both sides, making an equivalence between fascists and anti-fascists, something which we'll come back to later. A couple of years ago, I went on a visit to Warsaw, and we went to observe the Anglo nationalist procession, which happens every day to lead up to Christmas. And we were expecting there to be 3,000 or 4,000 Nazis as part of a larger kind of patriotic day. To our horror, 50,000 Nazis and overt far-right racists marched on that day. It was like being stuck in a sea. And the frightening thing was their slogans and their placards were the great old Nazi tropes, stuff I'm talking about, dividing us against each other. They had pictures of mosques with a big line going through it. No mosques in Poland. There are no mosques in Poland. There isn't a noticeable Islamic community in Poland. And the other one was immigration control. Bellicose calling for immigration control in a country whose primary economic problem at that point wasn't immigration, there were no immigrants. It was the fact that most of their workers were going to other countries in order to find work. Logic like that doesn't really matter when the job is to divide people up against each other and start them looking for the scapegoat. And around the edge of this, and there were lots of guys with frightening red flags and red flares and their masks with skulls on. And around this there was a periphery of kind of ordinary looking people. And we spoke to them and said, what are you doing here? Why are you with these guys? And they said, oh, it's a point of view. People are entitled to their opinion, and we think we are worried about immigration in this country. This is a really, really important point, and it emphasises the difference between what's happened on the continental Europe, and what's happened in this country in terms of mobilising against the far right and against fascism. We don't have that in this country. The BNP, which was the last of the Euro-fascist parties who were trying to use a combination of electoral politics and street politics, are now just a rump, having been quite a frightening force at one point. I don't think they've ever got an MP, but they've got councillors, quite a lot of councillors at one point. And street movements like the English Defence League, British First, have been reduced to rumps. And the reason that's happened in this country is because of the tactic of broad, wide-ranging community opposition to the far right at all points, which goes back initially to what happened at Cable Street in the 1930s when Oswald Mosley's black shirts were sent packing by a grassroots movement, but also has which comes through the tradition there to the Anti-Nazi League, to Rock Against Racism, and through to Unite Against Fascism. And that is, we close down the far right wherever we see them. And we do that politically by getting a broad-based coalition to close down their space. We have large street mobilisation. Wherever they go, wherever they have a demonstration, you will always find the UAF demonstration, even if it's small, standing against them. And it will be open to anybody to come and join that demonstration. We close down space in terms of no platforming. It's quite a hard argument sometimes, but it's important. In the 1930s, the democratic parties thought the Nazis were just another democratic party and brought them into coalition. Nazis aren't doing it. Nazis lie. As soon as they have a sniff of power, they destroy those democratic bodies and institutions and replace them with the worst kind of authoritarianism. So you don't debate with someone who denies your right to exist. So we close down and argue against giving the oxygen of publicity to the far right. It's important to say that should only ever apply to fascists. Everybody else can argue with. Fascism is different. And a great example of this in action was where I come from, in Walthamstow in North East London, where the English Defence League, Walthamstow is one of the most multicultural boroughs in the world. I think we have something like 130 different languages spoken in Waltham Forest. And this was a running sore to the English Defence League. Now, this was in 2012. At that point, the English Defence League could mobilise 2,000 or 3,000 people on a good day in some of their heartlands in places like Luton or up in Rotherham. And they announced a mobilisation to march right through the centre of Walthamstow. This was plainly a demonstration of strength and a provocation to the people of Walthamstow. And we organised a classic Unite Against Fascism United Front response to this. We mobilised people from right across the community. We had faith groups, we had the churches, we had political groups, we had cultural groups. And we, come the day of their demonstration, we really didn't know what to expect. It was quite possible that thousands of people could turn up. There could have been 50 of us, in which case we would probably have ended up in the afternoon in the cells for our own safety. As it happened, it was a triumph. 150 of them turned up, eventually, after the RMT had told them that they wouldn't run trains if they thought that the police were going to be escorting anyone from the EDL on it, so they had to come in their own coaches. There was about 150 of them turned up, and there were 5,000 of us, people from every walk of life came out. And we had a fantastic day out, and we cornered them in the end. We worked out the route they were going on, where they were being escorted by the police, had to cross one of the major crossroads in Walthamstow, so we all sat on it, and they couldn't go. And then, because there were so many of us, the police couldn't make a corridor through, so they had to stick them in a corner to have a little rally, which we didn't allow them any peace, and eventually they beat a retreat and were kettled by their coaches before they could let them go. And it was great because they actually ended up having to go to the toilet in the gutter. Which is not the most political response ever, but we really enjoyed it. It was a fantastic day. My favourite memory of it is as we came back up the main street in Walthamstow. One of the chip shops there was standing outside with boxes and boxes of chips and handing them out to people as he walked past. The whole community had come together and told the Nazis they had no place there. When I took the generator that we'd hired for the PA back the next day, they said, "Oh, was this for Saturday?" And I said, "Yes." He just went, "Don't worry about it then." The point about this isn't that it was a great day out. The point about this was made a political point that the Nazis have no place in Walthamstow. They have no place in multicultural East London. They have no place where we organise against them. What were they going to say at their next meeting? Well, that didn't work out very well, lads. They were annihilated. And that, what happened in Walthamstow, was one of a number of very large demonstrations that happened around that time, places like Tower Hamlets, that destroyed the credibility of the EDL, the English Defence League, in its own eyes. They're still going, but they're just a rump. They can't mobilise more than 20 or 30 people for their national mobilisation. They haven't had a chance to develop that thing that we saw I saw in Warsaw, where people were walking with them saying, "I think they've got a point. I think they should be allowed to have their say." We closed down that space. It's never normal to support Nazis. They're not all as spectacular as that, but we had a lovely UAF action in High Wycombe, just up the road here a year or so ago. Absolutely wonderful. The whole town turned out again, and they had no choice. They were bust in and bust out. If it wasn't for the cordon phalanx police, they would have no chance. The fact of the matter is, the global austerity, the falling of the economy, is causing the soil where Nazism thrives. It's causing the sewer that bred the rats is open and it's running through Europe. Put no finer point out. We're seeing this in the rise of these far-right parties. There is resistance. There's always resistance. The Unite Against Front, the United Front strategy that I've described, has proved itself phenomenally effective in closing down this space. But whilst the economy continues to tank, whilst they continue to divide us against each other with anti-Semitism, with Islamophobia, whilst they can't buy us out of this mess, the growth of the far right and the danger of it being co-opted into government and us starting on the road down to the next Auschwitz is a clear and real danger. And let's bear in mind that the last Holocaust was an analogue Holocaust. It used valve radio sets and petrol engines. The next one will be a digital Holocaust, using drones, iPads, and a kind of number crunching technology that we have now. This means that the resistance against fascism is an active and urgent task that we can all get involved with. I'd like to encourage everybody here to stand up to racism, to join Unite Against Fascism, to come to the UN anti-racist demonstration. That's a global way where we can point out to these people, you're in Jobbik, you're doing okay in Hungary, look what happens in London. These things are noticed and they're mattered. They get noticed, it does matter, it's really important. And let's unite against fascism.
Russ. Okay, so we've got some time for people to ask questions, make comments.
You've talked about physical action against Nazi groups, but what about some of the ideology in terms of Islamophobia? Because there's been groups of Islamic terrorists that people, they can use to their advantage. Do you have some sort of arguments for that to follow your causes? Because they don't seem to come out in re-campaigns.
Do you want to answer that now, or do you want to go around and...
No, let's ask a question. Do you want to come back on that one?
Yes, certainly. I think it's a really, really good question. And the fact of the matter is that although using that kind of racism is something you associate with Nazis, it's also something you should associate with conservatives. It's something you associate with the bosses. It means that Islamophobic narrative is being pumped into people. But one of the arguments we would use against any of these far-right people, they'll say, the EDL, we're always very careful, they'd say, we're not racist, we're not racists, we're not racist at all, we're against extremists. Actually, the Football Lads Alliance, which is a new development, which is the latest attempt to grow. In fact, they're very clear on that. And our answer is, well, I'm against extreme Islamic terrorism as well. We all are. Yeah, the question is, where does it come from? It develops in an environment of international imperialism, injustice, and exploitation. And actually what we need to do is fight that. There's a reason why we talk about radical Islam, and we're not talking about the problem of radical Buddhist terrorists. That's because they never found oil under Tibet. Yeah, they destroyed the infrastructure of the Middle East, and that's where people are Muslims. So that's where it comes from. I think you need to make it a much broader argument, and certainly we don't apologise for getting involved with apologising or making excuses. We condemn terrorist activity, absolutely, completely unequivocally. But I think you need to understand where it's coming from, and you need to argue that in a bigger context.
Yeah, I understand that, but it's the people that they're trying to project their politics towards. Perhaps the Donald Trump supporters for the people that have marginally right-wing ideas, but they get sucked into those concepts.
Well, yeah, when you hear Islamophobia from, I was with a very good friend of mine, and she quite casually said something that to me was really quite shockingly Islamophobic. But that's why it's really important. But first off, you make a distinction between that kind of soft racism and Nazis. So we don't debate with Nazis. You debate with the racists. You say, hang on a second, I don't think that's really true. I don't think the stats add up. And we work in solidarity. The other thing is the best way to stop racism is to hang out with people from different races. And that's why, for example, the Walthamstow EDL action was so provocative, but also that was so effective, because in an East London suburb, people from all different backgrounds all rub along and racism comes down. If you're isolated, you don't meet people like that, then racism can grow in a vacuum, which is why you get terrible Islamophobia in places like Poland, where there aren't any, or even in the Midwest of America, where Trump could storm that up. It seems absurd when all your neighbours are Muslims and Hindus and so on.
Yeah, it seems whenever there is a extreme right demonstration, provocation, etc. And I've read this in some of the exhibits, it seems the police are to protect them rather than the people who demonstrate against them. They seem to be running a greater risk of being arrested. Why is that?
Yeah, the police always view these things as being 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, and they view the fascists and the anti-fascists as being flip sides of the same coin. The difference actually is that on most UAF demonstrations, they're far more courteous and helpful to the far-right organisations than they are to us, and it can get extremely nasty sometimes. The point is we don't look to the police to protect us, because ultimately the government, the people in charge, the politicians, will turn to those Nazis when they need them. If things get bad enough, they'll turn to them to form their alliances to try and close us down. And the police will be on their side, just as it happened in Germany. That equivalence is part of their ideology that sees us as the enemy, really, as much as them. And the way you deal with it is numbers. Wayman Bennett, who is the chair of Unite Against Fascism, at the big, the Waltham Forest, the first one, we kept our Labour MP on board, Stella Creasy, and she turned up, and Wayman was there. Now normally, we get roughed up and told what to do. As soon as it was apparent there were thousands of us, the police stopped calling Wayman Wayman and started to call him Mr. Bennett. And there were dogs. We saw dogs, police dogs, riot dogs, behind the back of the town hall. And that's what they were going to use if there'd been a couple of hundred of each of us and it got out of control. As soon as we saw that Stella Creasy, who had to come on board with this because of the numbers that we'd generated, and she wanted to be seen as a part of it, suddenly she went to the commander and said, if you use those dogs, I'm going to ask questions in the house. Numbers is how you break that down.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't get this thing amongst fascists, this thing of the golden age of whatever nation they're from, the golden British age, the golden age of the United States. It seems almost delusional, where they're looking back in time to a time when they pictured themselves being there in this nation. It was great, and they were all powerful and what have you. So I suppose with some British fascists that I've known previously, they talk about the old Victorian days when we were a mighty, powerful nation. I don't know how you can get that silliness out of people's head. And I think to them, well, if you would have been alive back then, you'd have died 10 years ago at 30 years of age. You'd have lived in the most appalling conditions. The golden age was probably for a tiny bit of the population then. But, driving that delusion out of people's heads it seems impossible. What do you do about it?
Well, I think that's a great point. The point is that the people who are drawn to fascism in the first place are, actually their base is small business people who are being absolutely squeezed, as we see at the moment, and squeezed between, because the big businesses can kind of do okay in these recessions because they're big enough. The small businesses get squeezed, but also the people at the other end, the people who haven't had a job for years, people who sometimes haven't had jobs for generations in their family, are driven to absolute desperation and despair. And I think that myth of the golden age, you're quite right, at the height of Victoria's empire, my family were basically Peckham slum dwellers. I don't think they got any of the great glory. But that myth of the golden age, it goes along with the myth of the other race who have come over there to take it. It's a way that they have of focusing your attention away from the real enemy. I think Trotsky said that the fascism makes every worm feel like a dragon, because he can be a part of that tradition, he can march with his comrades, he can be part of the mighty dragon. Otherwise, he's just dust. And it is a disempowered and broken people. I think the way that you deal with that is the opposite side to it is as ordinary people, we can unite and work together as the organised working class. We can work in our trade unions, we can work with, and we can have power and we can change the world ourselves. And that it's not a strong movement in this country at the moment. One of the reasons why sometimes the fascists can go unchallenged. But if we can build up our own organisations and be a bulwark against that, almost as happened in Germany, then we've got our own vehicle to push back and to put our version of the truth and our vision of how the world could be as a bulwark against them.
I just wanted to ask you views on other forms of genocide. Perhaps the Balkans and perhaps what's happening in Myanmar don't really tie into the fascist ideology on the map. Just wondered how you differentiate yourself from that, or why you don't make comments on those issues.
First off, I'm against genocide. I think they're bad. But I think the important thing about that in essence is that the word fascism is sometimes used too loosely. People use it to mean extremely authoritarian, people use it to mean very right-wing, people use it to mean bastard. The definition of fascism that I'm working from is quite a specific one, which involves a kind of counter-revolutionary alliance of the middle class and sections of the workers who go into government and then overturn government to put basically the entire economy under government control, but still with private interests. That was a bit of a mouthful, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. And that's what you saw with Mussolini, is what you saw with Hitler, and saw with some of the other overtly fascist movements. The other things that are happening for a different reason, and they're happening, but because they're happening for a different reason, they need different tools to deal with them. So, for example, I take issue with people who refer to atrocities committed in the Middle East, for example, and they will say that it's clerical fascism or Islamofascism. I don't think the social causes of those things, as much as I hate them and condemn them, are the same as what we're seeing with the EDL, the BNP, and the Jobbik, and I think it's important to make that distinction. The woman over there was waving.
Yes, so just going back to the first point about terrorism and things, I think another point to add to what you said is this massive skewed media coverage. There's been a number of white right-wing attacks in America, even on police officers, that just haven't been touched by media. And here's the thing, I suppose I want to offer some advice, because I suppose I'm an activist, but I'm also a very compassionate person, and I struggle sometimes with, I think sometimes it helps that
the sort of anti-fascist marches and things like Clubbing Against EDL, to kind of dehumanise the other side. And I worry about that, because I worry then we're falling into the same trap. And I was wondering what you
I mean, in terms of the biased media, I think one of the most shocking was a couple of years ago, there was a newspaper, there was a worldwide media report of a group of refugees running amok in Cologne, wasn't it, in Germany, sexually assaulting en masse people that New Year, in their thousands. And this was reported around the world. It was a lie. There was not one grain of truth in it, except it adds to the noise, doesn't it? It adds to the background. People remember the story and not the retraction. In terms of dehumanising, I think that's actually a really good point. It's important that, A, we keep our anti-fascism political. There's another thread, another strand of the anti-fascist movement, which is the guys with the balaclavas. And they say the way you beat fascism is to thump it out of it. Now, I don't like that idea. I don't think... I'm not squeamish about it. I actually don't really mind if a fascist gets beaten up. It doesn't really bother me. But you can't end fascism. You don't stop the space that's caused fascism to come into being by thumping people. What we do is a political thing. And it does give space for people to change. And it does happen on occasion. Not necessarily me, but certainly some of my friends in UAF. So one particular friend who's been doing this right back from the anti-Nazi League days, and somebody came up to him on a tube train and eyed him up, and he eyed him up back in the 70s, and had renounced it, and he'd said it was to do with he'd been drawn to like an EDL or far right thing, and had seen the demonstrations, and he thought again about it. So by working politically, it doesn't happen all the time, but working politically, you have a chance to bring people over. And in fact, there are quite a lot of people in places like UAF who will say that in their younger days they could have gone either way. And in fact, because we had a political organisation that's inclusive, we can get involved with, and because we didn't demonise, we didn't thump them or call them names, we challenged their politics, they were actually able to vote for that and come over. Not enough, but some.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to what the lady just said, because I'm also an activist, I also have a lot of compassion. And I think it's that compassion that ought to be brought within the activism, because, I mean, fascists say spout a lot of hate, against certain members in our, or sections of our society. But it's actually bringing that compassion and saying, we don't approve of that. There's, people, they have a right to exist. So we need to show this compassion. What I'm trying to say is we need to come back at them, showing that we don't accept the hate that they stand. That's what I wanted to say.
I absolutely agree with that.
Mm-hmm. I think part of the problem is if you're on a fascist demonstration, on an anti-fascist demonstration, and you encounter fascists, you're not meeting them as individuals you can argue with. They're there as a force. And actually, we can testify that when the EDL came to Oxford and they had their mobilisation here, they were quite prepared to use violence. And there's no two ways about it. In fact, one of our a health worker, a 60-year-old health worker, was attacked and beaten by a group of them. Julie here, with a retired teacher and a
local author.
What?
A local author.
A 70-year-old author. They were doing a stall, handing out leaflets, and they were surrounded by 12 EDL who were quite intent on driving them off the street. And in fact, it was members of the public who rallied around to defend them. And actually, I think, I can't see whether, my compassion at that point is entirely with the people who are trying to defend the democratic space and say, we don't want, because these were coming into town, what they were trying to do was to incite racist attacks on Muslims. They wanted physical, violent attacks. That's what they were coming to do, if not to commit it themselves to incite it. And most of our activity was actually beating them in the argument of getting our argument out there. You mustn't condemn all Muslims for the act of a minority, because they were trying to hijack the feelings around the child abuse that had happened. So we had to go out and tackle that political argument, and we involved people who represented children who spoke out against, said, well, this is hurting children, this is not good for them, for people to do this. So there's a political argument, but actually, if they'd have gone for our people and used their physical presence to push us off the streets, I think we actually have to say at that point, if we do, we need to be there in numbers. Numbers is the key. You don't have to have a fight if there's enough of you. And that's the key to it, that is the key. But I'm never going to condemn somebody who ends up punching one of them if they have to defend themselves. Because that day, they were quite intent on sneaking behind and mounting attacks they were trying to pick out the activists and go for them. And that, you have to be aware of that.
I think it's worth pointing out.
I understand what you're saying, Ian, and I wouldn't, I wasn't actually, love being compassionate. But no, I think my compassion would end if there is somebody who is intent on using violence like these people were doing. And what I'm saying is using that compassion in our arguments against spouting hate.
So I think it's worth pointing out that those demonstrations are only part of what UEF does and only part of what we do as an anti-fascist, and they tend to be, very physical and sometimes very uncomfortable occasions. But, there's a lot more to it. Look at this exhibition. Feel the compassion and the love in this, and that's also a part of anti-fascism. It's going to be hard to be a fascist walking past this, and the ideas that people pick up in the education is what they take out there, because we also do this in our workplaces, we do it in our trade unions, we do it in our schools, when you hear those ideas coming in, and you challenge them.
Back to that in space. I'd like to say something about about ISIS. Because the gentleman this morning was sort of quite angry that we weren't saying anything about ISIS. And I wanted to point, because he was saying, well, they're racist. I said, well, actually, most of their victims were actually Muslims. When they bombed Manchester, when they were killing people in London, they weren't interested, actually. They weren't selected.